Open on a forced landing. Engine out. Textbook power off 180. Everyone walks away. The NTSB just finished 30 years of fatal general aviation accident data. Engine failure accounts for 3% of causes. Every pilot rehearses the engine out scenario on every check ride. It drives the $100,000 overhaul cycle. Pre-buy inspections are built around it. And according to 3 decades of NTSB data, it almost never shows up in the fatal column. So what does? That's the only question this video answers. The numbers for 2023 are as straightforward as a logbook entry. The NTSB recorded 1,097 general aviation accidents across the United States. Out of those, 186 involved fatalities. That is not a typo. 186 fatal accidents, not incidents, in a year that saw American general aviation pilots log an estimated 28.4 million flight hours. The fatal accident rate, when you run the math, lands at 0.65 per 100,000 hours flown. Every one of these figures comes straight from the NTSB public dashboard and the FAA annual flight hour survey. There is no rounding, no speculation, just the baseline reality. To put that in context, for every 100,000 hours a general aviation aircraft spends in the air, less than 1 fatal accident occurs. The scale matters. These are not numbers from a single region or a cherry-picked month. They represent every piston single engine, twin engine, helicopter, glider, and balloon that falls under the general aviation umbrella. The denominator is as wide as the field gets. The accident count, the fatal count, and the hours flown have all been cross-checked against the AOPA McSpadden Annual Report. No discrepancies, no hidden outliers. The data is locked. Before any talk of cause or category, these are the raw facts. 1,097 accidents, 186 fatal accidents, 28.4 million hours, 0.65 per 100,000 hours flown. This is the environment in which every other risk, every hierarchy, and every myth about what actually kills pilots has to stand up and be counted. The NTSB cause ledger for fatal general aviation accidents, compiled across 3 decades, does not flatter the stories pilots tell themselves. When the numbers are sorted into cause buckets, the pattern is blunt. Loss of control in flight, LOC-I, accounts for nearly half of all fatal outcomes, with most years landing between 40 and 47%. Controlled flight into terrain, CFIT, carves out another 12 to 17%. Maneuvering accidents, including stalls, spins, and steep turns gone wrong, add more than a quarter of the fatal count. VFR into IMC, fuel mismanagement, and other decision-driven events round out the rest. The slice reserved for engine failure is almost comically thin. In most years, it hovers near 3%. The NTSB dashboard, the AOPA's McSpadden annuals, and every major safety summary of the last decade agree. The engine failure scenario, the one that dominates check rides and hangar talk, barely registers in the fatal column. The numbers have been checked, recoded, and checked again. The pattern is not an artifact of reporting or shifting definitions. Whether you look at the 2023 NTSB export, the FAA's AGAS survey, or the latest McSpadden edition, the order holds: LOC-I at the top, CFIT next, maneuvering flight close behind, then a sharp drop to VFR into IMC and fuel events. Engine failure sits at the bottom, a statistical footnote. The hierarchy is not subtle, and it is not new. For 30 years, the fatal causes have kept this order with only minor year-to-year drift. The result is a quiet indictment of how risk is taught, imagined, and rehearsed in general aviation. The numbers do not care about tradition. They only care about what actually kills pilots. For every fatal engine failure, there are more than a dozen deaths from loss of control, terrain, or a bad decision at low altitude. This is the ledger that sets the terms for what comes next. A pilot trims for pattern altitude, eyes darting between the runway and the airspeed indicator. It's the most familiar routine in flying, yet this is where the numbers turn hostile. AOPA's 15-year review of 2015 instructional accidents found the pattern is not just a training ground, but the single most common environment for fatal loss of control. Stall spin events, especially, do not wait for cruise or approach. They erupt during the base to final turn, the steep bank after a go-around, or a rushed maneuver at low altitude. Instructors know the script. Keep the ball centered, watch your speed, do not get slow in the turn. But the numbers say something else happens under pressure. The so-called altitude paradox is not a theory, it's a statistical fact. Below 50 feet above ground, the odds are on your side. 85% walk away from a stall or spin that starts that low. There is simply not enough time for the airplane to get out of shape before it hits the ground. But move the loss of control up just a few hundred feet into the pattern, say at 200 to 500 feet, and the fatality rate flips. 3 out of 4 will not survive. At 1,000 feet or more, where you would expect more time to recover, 90% of those accidents end in death. The reason has nothing to do with physics, and everything to do with how quickly a pilot can recognize and reverse a stall or a spin before the ground comes up. It's not just a matter of altitude, but what the pilot is doing at that moment. The AOPA study found that during maneuvering flight, intentional stalls, steep turns, or pattern work, fatal outcomes multiply. Nearly a quarter of all fatal training accidents involve loss of control in the pattern, and most of those are triggered by pilot input, not mechanical failure. The numbers are not quiet about it. The pattern is the crucible where bad decisions and slow reactions turn recoverable mistakes into final outcomes. For every checkride that drills engine-out procedures, there are a dozen fatal accidents that began with a stall or spin at pattern altitude, where recovery time is measured not in seconds, but in feet. The lesson is written in the docket. Altitude is not a safety margin if you're already out of control. Partial power loss is the scenario nobody rehearses, but the numbers say it is the one that will kill you. Mechanics who read the accident reports know the pattern by heart. The engine sputters, but does not quit. Maybe it is a clogged injector, a sticking valve, or a slow fuel leak. You still have some thrust, just not enough to climb, not enough to make the runway, not enough to force the decision that a clean engine out brings. The pilot, seeing the RPM needle drop but not fall to zero, tries to nurse the airplane along. There is hesitation, troubleshooting, a hope that coaxing the throttle or switching tanks will buy a few more seconds. The checklist sits in the lap, untouched. The clock is running. The McSpadden analysis, covering over 1,000 power loss accidents, found a 12% higher fatality rate in partial power cases than in full engine failures. The logic is brutal. A total failure triggers the script every pilot knows. Pitch for glide, pick a field, commit. But partial power breeds uncertainty. Pilots try to stretch the glide, circle for the airport, or climb away from obstacles, all while the aircraft is bleeding altitude and airspeed. The distraction is fatal. In the NTSB docket, you will find sequence after sequence where a pilot with partial power stalls turning from base to final, or overshoots the runway, or tries to salvage altitude by pulling back, only to drop the wing and spin in. These are not rare edge cases. The numbers are clear. Partial power events produce more dead pilots than total engine failures. The fatality rate climbs not because the engine is more broken, but because the pilot is more indecisive. The machine gives mixed signals and the human brain, trained for a binary emergency, cannot keep up. In the end, it is not the engine that gives out first, it is the margin for error. The accident record is littered with airplanes that could have landed safely in a field, but instead spun in from a low turn, chasing the illusion of just a little more power. The lesson is not buried in the data, it is written in every torn wing and broken prop. Hesitation kills, and partial power is the perfect trap. The clock starts the moment a VFR pilot enters the clouds. No warning bell, no sudden jolt, just a slow erasure of the horizon. From that first second, The countdown is on. University of Illinois researchers ran the numbers. The median time from visual reference loss to unrecoverable loss of control is 178 seconds, 3 minutes. That's the statistical window between a pilot's last glimpse of daylight and the point where the aircraft is no longer responding to inputs. The study was published in 2003 and reaffirmed by a 2025 review of 46 accident studies. The number does not budge, no matter the aircraft, no matter the pilot's hours. In the NTSB record, VFR into IMC makes up only 4% of all general aviation accidents. But once the airplane is inside the cloud, the odds flip. Between 79 and 92% of these events end in death. The fatality rate is so high, it barely leaves a margin for error. The spatial disorientation does not wait for darkness either. Nearly 7 out of 10 of these accidents happen in daylight. Pilots see the haze, the lowering ceiling, the edge of the cloud bank, and press on anyway. Inside those 178 seconds, the cockpit becomes a shrinking box. The attitude indicator drifts, airspeed wanders, and the hands that once flew the airplane by feel now chase phantom sensations. The NTSB docket is full of accident sequences where the pilot, still believing they have time, makes small corrections, left, right, nose up, nose down, until the airplane is in a spiral. The clock does not care about experience or confidence. It only cares about the seconds ticking away. Once the countdown hits 0, the airplane is unrecoverable. That's not a theory, it's the median outcome measured and logged across decades of fatal records. The numbers on VFR into IMC are not just a matter of bad luck or weather. They expose a deeper flaw in how pilots think about risk and how the system trains for it. Plan continuation bias, the urge to stick with the original plan even as conditions unravel, shows up in about 3 out of every 4 fatal VFR into IMC accidents. Sabrina Woods' 2024 Human Factors. Briefing spells it out. Pilots recognize the cues, see the horizon fading or the ceiling dropping, but press on anyway. It is not ignorance, it is a cognitive trap that has been measured and catalogued in accident after accident. The problem runs deeper than weather judgment. The numbers show that an instrument rating, the supposed antidote to IMC risk, is no guarantee. 27% of VFR into IMC fatalities involve pilots who hold an instrument rating. In most of those cases, the pilot was either not current or failed to transition to instrument procedures when it mattered. The rating is a card in the wallet, not a shield. The data does not care if the certificate is new or decades old. Proficiency is what counts, and the record is full of pilots who had the rating but not the recent experience. This is where the gap between rating and readiness becomes fatal. The NTSB docket is littered with flights where the pilot was legal but not prepared, current on paper but behind the airplane when the clouds closed in. The plan continuation mindset, paired with rusty instrument skills, leaves almost no margin. The airplane keeps flying until the pilot runs out of time, out of cues, and out of options. The lesson is written in the docket. Training for the rating is not the same as being ready for the real thing. The fatal record does not forgive the difference. A mechanic stands over a fuel selector, grease under his nails, reading the NTSB docket for the 3rd time. The airplane on the ramp is a write-off, but the story is as old as the logbooks. Not a student pilot, not a rookie. This was a commercial certificate holder, logged over 1,000 hours, flying a model he had owned for years. The docket is blunt. Fuel starvation. The selector was set to a tank that ran dry while the other still held half a load. The engine quit in the pattern just as the numbers say it will, and there was no time to recover. The checklist was in the side pocket, untouched. The pilot's last words on the radio were switching tanks, and they came 8 seconds before impact. The NTSB safety alert. SA067 calls this the 6th leading cause of fatal general aviation accidents. More than 50 deaths a year, and 95% traced straight to pilot action. The split is almost surgical. 56% run out of fuel entirely, tanks bone dry. 35% have fuel on board, but it never reaches the engine. The mechanic's voice is tired. It is always the selector. It is always the guy who has flown this airplane 100 times. Students barely register in the stats, 2% maybe. The rest are commercial and ATP-rated pilots, the ones who should know better, who do know better. Nearly half of all fuel mismanagement accidents happen to the most experienced pilots in daylight, in visual conditions, flying familiar routes. The pattern is so routine, the docket reads like a checklist. Skipped cross-check, selector left on the wrong tank, fuel gauges ignored because the pilot is sure he knows the airplane. The NTSB language does not mince words. Pilot complacency, overestimation of ability, checklist compliance decay. The annual accident count never budges. The same mistakes, year after year, with the same outcome. The system treats fuel management like a solved problem, but the numbers say otherwise. This is not a failure of knowledge. It is the slow rot of habit. The data does not care about a pilot's hours or confidence. It only cares that every year, more than 50 families get the same phone call and the mechanic gets another airplane to examine, another selector frozen in place. The lesson is written in the docket. Experience does not inoculate against complacency, and the fuel system does not forgive routine. Federal regulations still define proficiency in general aviation with the lightest touch. The biennial flight review, 1 hour in the classroom, 1 hour in the air, every 24 months, stands as the only requirement for most private pilots. There is no mandate for spin recovery, no demand for full stall recognition, and nothing that addresses the realities of loss of control or decision-driven accidents. The Airman Certification Standards, the document that governs every checkride, asks only for basic stall awareness. It does not require a single demonstration of spin recovery, nor does it ask pilots to manage a partial power scenario or a fuel selector error under pressure. The system's minimums are a checklist, not a defense. The numbers in the NTSB database do not flatter this approach. Pilots with 100 to 400 hours, those just past the learning curve but not yet seasoned, show up in the fatal accident record more often than raw beginners. It is a confidence trap, enough experience to feel at home, not enough to recognize the edge. The regulatory flaw, designed to keep the door open for new pilots, leaves a gap wide enough for complacency to slip through. The accident docket is full of pilots who were current on paper, legal in every sense, but unprepared for the kind of scenario that actually kills. The Federal Aviation Administration's own trend data confirms the pattern. Currency does not equal competence, and the minimums do not match the threats on the ledger. A flight school director, asked about the disconnect, does not mince words. He says they teach to the test. The test is what the Federal Aviation Administration says it is, but the test is not what the accident record says it should be. He points to the syllabus. No requirement for partial power drills, no forced fuel selector failures, no scenario-based training for planned continuation bias or spatial disorientation. The director's frustration is plain. Every year, the same accidents, the same gaps, the same pilots who thought they were ready. The minimums are not a firewall, they are a formality. The data is not ambiguous. The system, as written, is calibrated for paperwork, not for survival. The indictment is not subtle, and the numbers are the evidence. The data is blunt. Mechanical failure is rarely fatal, but pilot decisions and lapses in basic airmanship still write most obituaries. Today, every hour aloft is governed by choices, not just checklists. The next accident isn't hiding in the engine. It's waiting in a routine flight, a rushed judgment, a silent overconfidence. Numbers don't lie, but our training and our culture still do. What will you believe at altitude?